Throughout history, battles have been won and lost, empires have risen and fallen, but sometimes, the fate of the entire world can hinge on a single decision made by one person in the heat of conflict. Today, we're diving into one of the most consequential decisions ever made in warfare, a choice that not only sealed the fate of an army but also altered the course of the 20th century forever. We're talking about the Battle of Stalingrad and Adolf Hitler's catastrophic order, no retreat. By the late summer of 1942, the German war machine seemed unstoppable. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, had pushed deep into Russian territory. The German Sixth Army, one of the Wehrmacht's most powerful and battle-hardened formations, was at the gates of a city bearing the name of the Soviet leader himself, Stalingrad. Capturing this industrial hub on the Volga River was not just a strategic objective, it was a massive propaganda victory waiting to happen. For Hitler, taking Stalin's city was a personal obsession. The initial German assault was ferocious. The Luftwaffe reduced the city to rubble, and German panzers and infantry pushed into the urban landscape. The fighting was brutal, and like anything seen before. It wasn't a battle of open fields but a rat war, fought from building to building, room to room, and even sewer to sewer. The Soviets, under the command of General Vasily Chuikov, defended their city with incredible tenacity, famously declaring, "There is no land for us behind the Volga." Every pile of rubble became a fortress, every street a killing ground. By November, the German Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, was bogged down in the city. They controlled about 90% of Stalingrad, but the final victory remained agonizingly out of reach. The German soldiers were exhausted, their supply lines were stretched thin, and the brutal Russian winter was beginning to set in. They had suffered immense casualties in the relentless street fighting. Still, Paulus and his men believed they were on the verge of success. They had no idea what was coming. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched their counter-offensive Operation Uranus. This wasn't a frontal assault on the Germans in the city. Instead, two massive Soviet pincer movements struck the weak flanks of the German line, which were held by poorly equipped Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian allied forces. The Soviet T-34 tanks smashed through these positions with terrifying speed. Within just 4 days, the pincers met at the town of Kalach, west of Stalingrad. The trap had closed. The entire German Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, was now completely encircled. This is where a pivotal moment arrives. General Paulus immediately recognized the mortal danger his army was in. His commanders on the ground saw it too. The logical, militarily sound decision was to attempt an immediate breakout. The Soviet ring was still relatively thin, and the Sixth Army, though battered, was still a formidable fighting force. They had a fighting chance to punch through the encirclement and link up with other German forces. Paulus sent a desperate message to Hitler's headquarters, requesting permission to break out. He argued that holding their position was impossible, they would be starved and frozen into submission. All eyes turned to Hitler. His generals, including the chief of the general staff, Kurt Zeitzler, begged him to allow the breakout. They laid out the cold, hard facts: the Sixth Army could not be supplied by air, and every day they waited, the Soviet grip would tighten. But Hitler was not a man who listened to reason when it conflicted with his will. For him, Stalingrad was a symbol. To retreat from Stalin's city would be an admission of defeat, a blow to his prestige he was unwilling to accept. And then came the fateful decision. Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, made a reckless and catastrophic promise. He assured Hitler that his air force could supply the entire Sixth Army from the air. He claimed they could fly in hundreds of tons of supplies every single day. It was a complete fantasy. The Luftwaffe lacked the transport planes, the airfields were too far away, and the brutal winter weather and Soviet anti-aircraft fire made such an operation impossible. But it was exactly what Hitler wanted to hear. It gave him the justification he needed to deny reality. Hitler's order came back, unequivocal and absolute: the Sixth Army will hold their positions to the last man and the last round. I forbid a breakout. Paulus was ordered to stand fast and create a fortress in Stalingrad, which would be supplied by Göring's promised air bridge. For the soldiers of the Sixth Army, this was a death sentence. The air bridge was a disaster from day one. On the best days, the Luftwaffe managed to deliver only a fraction of the required supplies. The men inside the Kessel, or cauldron as the encirclement was known, began to starve. Ammunition dwindled. Frostbite and disease became as deadly as enemy bullets. They ate their horses, then they ate dogs, cats, and rats. The temperature plummeted to 30 degrees below 0 Celsius, and the soldiers, still in their summer uniforms, froze to death in their foxholes. A German relief attempt, Operation Winter Storm, was launched in December. Led by Field Marshal von Manstein, a column of panzers fought its way to within 30 miles of the trapped army. Manstein sent a message to Paulus, urging him to break out and meet the relief force. It was the last chance. But Paulus, a man bound by his oath of obedience, refused to disobey Hitler's direct order. He radioed back, asking for permission once again. Hitler's answer was the same no. The relief force, facing overwhelming Soviet pressure, was forced to turn back. The last glimmer of hope for the Sixth Army was extinguished. The end was a slow, agonizing descent into hell. By late January 1943, the Soviets had split the pocket in two and were closing in on the last pockets of German resistance. Hitler, in a final, cynical gesture, promoted Paulus to the rank of Field Marshal. No German Field Marshal had ever surrendered, and the message was clear: Paulus was expected to take his own life. But Paulus chose to live. On January 31, 1943, he surrendered what was left of the southern pocket. A few days later, the remaining northern pocket also gave up. Of the nearly 300,000 men of the Sixth Army trapped at Stalingrad, over 91,000 were taken prisoner. The rest had perished. And of those who surrendered, weakened by starvation and frostbite, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The scale of the disaster was unprecedented. So, how did this one decision, Hitler's refusal to allow a breakout, change world history? First, the destruction of the Sixth Army was a blow from which the German military on the Eastern Front never recovered. They lost not only a massive number of their best soldiers, but also vast quantities of irreplaceable equipment. The strategic initiative on the Eastern Front permanently passed to the Soviet Union. From Stalingrad onward, the Red Army would be on the offensive, pushing the Germans all the way back to Berlin. Second, the defeat was a catastrophic psychological blow to the Nazi regime and a huge morale boost for the Allies. The myth of German invincibility, which had terrified Europe for years, was shattered for good. Stalingrad became a symbol of hope and resistance around the world, proof that Hitler could be beaten. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Hitler's decision revealed the fatal flaw at the heart of the Third Reich, the Führer's absolute power and his detachment from reality. His military commanders knew the correct course of action, but they were powerless to act against his fanatical will. This pattern of disastrous decision-making, born from arrogance and delusion, would repeat itself until the final collapse of his regime in 1945. What if Hitler had listened to his generals? What if he had allowed the Sixth Army to break out in November 1942? They would have suffered heavy losses, but a large portion of the army would likely have escaped. They could have reformed, re-equipped, and established a more stable defensive line. The war on the Eastern Front would have been prolonged, costing countless more lives. It's impossible to say for certain what would have happened, but the path to Allied victory would have been even longer and bloodier. The Battle of Stalingrad stands as a chilling monument to the consequences of a single, terrible decision. It's a story of incredible sacrifice on the Soviet side, and a tragedy of an army sacrificed for the ego of one man. Hitler's order not to retreat didn't just destroy an army, it marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich and set the world on a new course. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what other historical decisions you'd like to see covered. See you next time.